Bueno, camaradas, vamos
Comrades,
a empezar.
we'll resume the session.
Vamos a repensar la programación del centenario.
The session on the 100th anniversary and this conference of the comrades Ernest, Mandel and Livio Maitan at this IRI Institute, but also with the comrades that are following the session online via Zoom. Now we have some contributions made from the comrades Terry, Great Britain, Alda, Sousa, Portugal, Jorgelina, Argentina, and Kay, the United States. They will explain us their contributions and reflections about what Ernest Mandel and Livio Maitan brought to their association at political level, either through their life or through the political analysis they made. So, Terry, you have the word. And then we will open also the discussion for other contributions.
Thank you, Tasia. I need to start with the things I won't cover in any depth. I'll say very little about Livio. The only time I remember him coming to Britain was for the 60th anniversary of the Fourth International in 1998, where he spoke alongside Charlie Van Gelderen, who by then was the last surviving person to have attended the founding conference of the Fourth International. Charlie and Livio knew each other well, as Charlie had spent time in the north of Italy during the war, and they appreciated catching up with each other outside the meeting as well as inside it. But even focusing on Ernest, there are many things I can only touch on. His economic work, particularly an introduction to Marxist economic theory, written in 1967, was the basis of educationals we ran for decades in the IMG. His writings on state capitalism, which were the basis of polemics with the SWP, the organisation of the British left, which at the time most closely competed with the British section, the IMG, which, as Alex has referred to, are collected in the second volume of his writings, Marxist Against Stalinism. With more time, I would explore more of his writings on organisation. The pamphlet we produced on the Mann's theory of organisation was again a crucial document for the IMG, one I remember debating and discussing many times. And later, the FI document on socialist democracy, which I think was one of the most important programmatic texts of our movement, which Ernest played a crucial role in developing. But to get to the first thing that I want to focus on, which was Mandel's writings on the Second World War. The first time I saw Mandel in person was at a school organised by the IMG in London in 1976. It was a big event for me, both because it was one of the first times I spent a weekend in London with comrades. I was living in Manchester at the time. But it was more significant because if I already knew at 19 that Mandel was a powerful writer, he was even more so as a public speaker. Alex spoke about his polemical impact in his writings, but to hear him in person was a completely different experience and one that I'll remember for the rest of my life. So what was it that Mandel had to say about the Second World War? The text of what he said in the summer school is available in the Marxist internet, in the Marxist.org internet. But he developed this writing further in his book on the Second World War. Mandel quotes Lenin on analysing that wars can have more than one character. Lenin says, for example, a movement by any oppressed nationality against the imperialist aggression is a just movement. And the fact that the leadership of these movements could betray by linking these movements politically and organisationally to imperialism is a reason to denounce these leaders, not a reason to condemn these movements. I think that quote from Lenin has a power today when we're considering both the situation in Ukraine and the situation in Palestine. Mandel went on to develop this analysis in much more detail, the analysis of Lenin in much more detail when talking about the Second World War. He argued that the Second World War had 5 different aspects to it. I'm not going to talk about them all, but I think it's worth quoting some of what he said. He said, talking about the third facet, third, there was a just war of national defense of the Soviet Union, a workers' state against an imperialist power. The fact that the Soviet leadership allied itself not only in a military way, which was absolutely justified, but also politically with the Western imperialists, in no way changed the just nature of that war. He continues, we were for absolute victory of the Soviet people against the murderous robbers of German imperialism. He continues later. Fourth, there was a just war of national liberation of the oppressed colonial peoples of Africa and Asia. In Latin America, there was no such war. Launched by the masses against British and French imperialism, sometimes against Japanese imperialism, and sometimes against both in succession, one after the other. Again, these were obviously absolutely justified wars of national liberation, regardless of the particular character of the imperialist powers. Later he continues, now I come to the fifth war, which is the most complex. I would not say that what was going on in the whole of Europe occupied by national and Nazi imperialism, but more especially in 2 countries, Yugoslavia and Greece, to an extent in Poland, and incipiently in France and Italy. That was a war of liberation by the oppressed workers, peasants, and urban petty bourgeoisie against the German Nazi imperialists and their stooges. To deny the autonomous nature of that war means saying in reality that the workers and peasants of Western Europe had no right to fight against those who were enslaving them at that moment, unless their minds were clearly set against bringing in other enslavers in place of the existing ones. That's an unacceptable position. But it was impossible to prevent such a betrayal by abstaining from participating in this movement. And then this, he explains that he's polemicizing in particular against the forces of Lutte, who took an abstentionist position and a very sectarian position, particularly to developments in France during the resistance. He continues, the correct revolutionary position, and I say this with a certain apologetic tendency because it's the one defended from the beginning by the Belgian Trotskyists, against what I would call both the right wing and the ultra left wing of the European Trotskyist movement, should have been to fully support all mass struggles and uprisings, whether armed or unarmed, against Nazi imperialism in occupied Europe, in order to fight to transform them into a victorious socialist revolution. That is, to fight to oust from the leadership of the struggles those who were linking them with Western imperialists and who wanted in reality to maintain capitalism at the end of the war, as in fact happened. Ernest speaks at length, and comrades have already referred to it from this podium, about the experience of Yugoslavia, which I think was a seminal movement, a seminal moment for the Fourth International to begin to understand that the forces that can lead revolutionary upheaval are not always forces that we politically support, that have the same program as us, but nevertheless that the force of circumstances can lead to people taking a step forward for the working class. What are the lessons of all of this today for the discussion on Ukraine? In my view, Mandel's writing about wars within wars, about different facets of wars, has been misused significantly by Susan Watkins writing in New Left Review, where she talks about the multifaceted context of the Ukraine war, but does it to only focus on the question of the way that NATO is using the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a gift to NATO by Putin, to remilitarize itself. Whereas Mandel shows us that we can and must be more sophisticated. I think Mandel's writings are deeply significant in terms of his understanding of the national question. Something that, again, I think is a profoundly important legacy of the Fourth International. The final segment, and can people please tell me where I am in the timing rather than playing with their phones? Is an event that I wasn't present at in person, but had the opportunity to watch many years later, which is Mandel's debate with the Communist Party of Great Britain on strategies for Western Europe. The British CP was never as significant as the CP was in many other European countries. And by the time this debate took place in 1977, the CP had already started to lose its most important trade union bases because of deindustrialization. But Britain was significant in terms of the evolution of the CPs in Europe because it was the site of a significant fight between the Eurocommunists and the more Stalinist wings. By the time this was taking place, the Eurocommunist wing of the British CP was in complete dominance. There were 4 speakers alongside Ernest at this event from the IMG and 5 speakers from the Communist Party, all of whom were Eurocons. This tension in the CPs was to play itself out in Britain when the Communist Party in Britain was set up in 1988, whereas the Eurocommunists were to dissolve the CPG in 1991 to form an organisation called Democratic Left. They wanted to get rid of the term communist entirely. That organisation staggered on, I'm going to need an extra minute, till 1999, but was scarcely visible. So this was the context of the debate, which is online on Red Moon Rising and on the Verso website. what were the key things that Mandel took up in this debate? He criticised the lack of internationalism of the Euro-communists, pointing out that they didn't even have a strategy for Western Europe, never mind a strategy for Europe as a whole, completely abandoning the slogan of the United Socialist States, even of Western Europe, never mind of Europe as a whole. He damns their class collaboration, and he uses two concrete analyses of the situation which are incredibly powerful. He talks about the situation in Chile and the fact that Allende was in fact following the same strategy as the Eurocons, a strategy to avoid class confrontation, which meant that when rank and file soldiers in Chile appealed to Allende for support, Allende said, no, we can't do that because that would be to up the stakes. A completely naive situation for which approach for which Allende not only paid with his life, but led to the massacre of thousands of others. He gives another example, which is much less well known, of the dispute of the strike that was going on in northwest London at the Greenwich photograph processing plant, a dispute that was led by mainly Asian young workers, in which our comrades played a significant role in the support groups locally and nationally. That strike was to last for 2 years. Mandel points out that at the time he was speaking, workers in the Postal Workers Union had started to refuse to deliver post to the plant. If that solidarity action had been allowed to spread, that could have ended the dispute with a victory in the first 6 months of the strike. In fact, the strike was to stagger on to a defeat 2 years later. And it was the Communist Party within the local trades council and strike committees and more generally nationally that were to argue against that sort of workers' control at the base that broke with both the bourgeois state and parliamentary democracy. I don't have time to conclude, so I will have to leave my other comments for later in the seminar.
Gracias, Terry.
Thank you, Terry, for your contributions. Now, Alda from Portugal will have the word.
Good morning, Congress. Good morning, Congress. I'm very thankful for the invitation to speak at this seminar, and I'll try my best to pay the due tribute to Ernest and Livio. I would say that their contributions during their lifetime and through the analysis they produced will stay with us forever. I'm not saying that we agree with everything that at each moment, but it's a fundamental contribution for our thinking and for our political practice. So I'll try to concentrate more in what they brought to our organization at the political level, especially at the time of 74, 75, and 76. As you are all aware, I hope, we lived in a fascist dictatorship, 48 years of fascist dictatorship, until the 25th of April of 1974. So it was very difficult. Before 74, of course, there were a lot of struggles, a lot of meetings, and there were also some Trotskyist groups or reading committees or gatherings and so on to discuss politics and to read a lot, and especially, I'm talking especially amongst university students. The first Mandel's book to be published in Portugal was in 1971. It was the initiation to a Marxist theory of economics, except that if you look at here at the title, the Marxist term was removed, because if it was a way of dribbling the censorship, it was published by a very good left-wing publisher in Portland, in the hometown, that still exists, and that at the time they published a lot also about telling for program, the PIGC, and some of the other texts coming from the leaders of the liberation movement from the colonies. And obviously there was huge censorship, so this was a way of dribbling the censorship. But it was very widely read amongst not only the students who were starting to feel attracted for revolutionary Marxism, but even also by Maoists and others. Before the 25th of April, there were travels to Paris by several Portuguese comrades who got in contact, in touch, especially with LCR and with some FI leaders, and also brought books and pamphlets and a lot of things from France. Joan Font from the LCR Spanish State came to meet with some of the groups, and the International Communist League was founded in December 1973, and Mikhail Levy and Paco Robs attended the founding conference for the International. We were about 40 to 50 members, not more than that, when the dictatorship was overthrown in 74. So we were a really tiny organization. The LCI applied to become a sympathizer organization at the I5 Congress in 74. Obviously, when the organization was founded, no one would expect that in 4 months' time we would have the overthrow of dictatorship. In the years 74 and 76, that the ones I'm concentrating on, besides Ernest and Livio, many other comrades came to Portugal to speak at public meetings, at conference, or to discuss and to follow the work of the LCI, Alain Crévin, Benzaïd, Charles Michel, Michel Rover, who stayed for an entire year helping us in several different ways. Well, at the time, obviously, there were heated discussion within the section, between the section or the sympathizers and other organizations, and also within their file. Obviously, there won't have the time to go into all these details, but it's obvious that we went through several discussions about how to characterize the Portuguese Revolution, how to characterize the process that was going on in Portugal, and so on. And there are several resolutions from the FI, articles in Impercor and the other press. And really, the FI made a huge effort, for which we are very, very deeply thankful, to help us building in a section in a country where the Communist Party was huge, absolutely huge, and were having also many Maoist organizations that were much, much bigger than us. Livio, in his memoirs, which I find really absolutely fantastic document and should not be overlooked, but on the contrary should be spread and known, talks about the failure to identify Portugal as a country where a revolutionary crisis might arise. I don't think it was really a failure, because nobody in Portugal would expect that to happen. I mean, the progressive military that were engaged in the coup that overthrew dictatorship knew what was happening and were preparing this military coup. But we didn't know, except in the last days before, that it was bound to happen. But obviously, this situation opened an eruption of the masses in the political scene. And as Livio points out, also the radicalization peaked, and especially in 75 with the occupation of factories and land, growing number of workers' commission. So there was a high degree of self-organization coming from all sides of society, of workers, of people in the neighborhoods, and even the soldiers, the rank and file soldiers, organized in soldiers' commissions within the army and the MFA, the movement of the armed forces. And this really, and also it was possible in 75, the relationship of forces was such that, for instance, the bank and some of the main strategic companies were nationalized. So it was really a shift in balance of forces. Livio came several times to Portugal. The first time in 74, he spoke at a demonstration in solidarity with Chile in September. He attended some conferences of the LCR and later of the PSR. He gave many educationals that were very, very much appreciated and very important for us on the history of the on China, on Stalinism, on workers' control, on socialist democracy, things that were very important to shape our thinking and our political understanding and also our practice. We really liked very much his generosity, his commitment, his clarity when he was posing things, and his wonderful sense of humor. And whenever he came and whenever it was possible, we would allocate some time for a football match with him that he really enjoyed, and so did we. Ernest came to Portugal first time 2 weeks after the 25th of April. His first speech, followed by a debate, was in a center, called Center of Students from the Colonies, formerly called the House of Students of the Portuguese Empire. And that obviously it was taken over and it changed the name after 25th of April. And the president of the center, then at the time, already the 10th of May, was Helena Lopes da Silva, a comrade of ours, who was also a militant of the PITC. She was from Cape Verde. And obviously he talked about the duty of solidarity of the struggle of people under colonial oppression, the convergence of interest between workers of imperialist countries and colonialist people. So the two sectors of the revolution, and about internationalism. This is the publication that has two speeches of him in 1974 and was widely spread. Then he spoke at an LCI public meeting a few days later. Obviously, I'm not going to read all that because I don't have the time. And he was really happy, saying it was a great happiness to be able to speak in Lisbon, liberating from fascism. And he took up the question of how the liberation struggles from people from the colonies had a decisive contribution to the overthrow of fascism in Portugal, about the unconditional support and total independence of the colonies, and so on. Okay, so I'll go, and also about the class independent, independent of the provisional government of class collaboration. Now I have to go quickly. He spoke also at a meeting with several far-left organizations, who was about the immediate and conditional independence for the colonies, but also where he spoke and saying that FI and its Portuguese section were in favor of the unity of action of revolutionary organizations. And I think it was quite important at the time. In an interview in April 75, I mean, these photos, I took them from print screens from the archives of the National Portuguese Television. And they are still there, you can still access it. And he said you can read what's in the slide, but he said that the explosive rise of mass struggle has created a pre-revolutionary situation in Portugal. So he agreed with Livio in characterizing the situation, but his optimism. I'm absolutely sure that we may soon have an even more explosive situation in Spain. Well, I think reality didn't really exactly follow the way he thought. Then this is photos from the second conference of LCI in August 75, with some people speaking. Here you have Ernest, and you have Chico translating Ernest's speech. Very young Francisco translating Ernest. I'd like to say a few words about the publishing of Ernest books in the Antidote was our publisher. They were headed, not about books that were published by other publishers, but because they are quite a few. And so we picked up some for instance, the question of the fight for the socialist democracy in the Soviet Union was very important for us, and as was the introduction to Marxism. We republished the initiation of Marxist economic theory. This time, Marxist term was there, of course, because we were no longer under censorship. And to finish, I think that it's about time. Oh, okay. I'd just say that this year we paid tribute to Ernest in a meeting organized by Cultra. Cultra is a cultural association that is close to the left bloc, and we had a public meeting where Francisco, myself, Cecilia, who's also a comrade of ours, and Luis Fazenda, who's a leader of the left bloc, spoke. Jaime Pastor from Viento Sur and from the Anticapitalistas also spoke. I'm very sorry that I don't have a photo of him speaking, but he really did speak and made a wonderful contribution. And we all wanted to talk when we spoke about Ernest and his contributions, his different contributions, and the tasks of Marxism today. So he's not, of course, for us, something that that is from the past. We pay tribute this year because we think that his practice, his text is and so important, and also we pay tribute to his revolutionary optimism that has never left us, and it's a huge and very responsible legacy. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, camarada.
Thank you very much
Alda.
to Alda, and
Y
now
ahora
we'll go
seguimos con la
to
compañera
Jorgelina from Argentina.
de Argentina.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It is a pleasure for us to be here in this homage. Maybe our intervention will not be about our militant contact with Mandel or Livio, but mostly with their books and their work. And we will mostly highlight the contributions that Mandel in particular did to our organization. In a documentary on Mandel's life, he himself says that whoever writes stays. And so due to that, groups such as ours were able to read his work, and it is an input to our political stances. And talking about our militant history in Argentina and the encounters with their books, I want to talk about 3 moments. Our first encounter, collective encounter of our group with Mandel was in the year 98. The spirit of the time, at least in our case, we were trying to consolidate political organization. And so we took his Leninist theory of organization, the book that Terry already talked about, as a basis. And in that time, a lot of the movements and activism were rejecting building political organizations. And so we were part of that at the time, but we had the contacts with the student movement or with the Desokupas movement over there, and we even had some spaces with the unions, but there was a rejection from the left parties at the time. But at the same time, we were getting close to an economic crisis. There was an increase in debt and a life that was deteriorating for all of us, for the entire country. And all of this demanded not just the reconstruction of the capacity of the struggle, social struggle, but also a confrontation in terms of political alternatives. So that's why it was so important for us to be able to constitute political organization. And that's where Mandel came in, because again, activism was rejecting this, but we were able to discuss the importance of organization in political groups, which differed from all the political parties that we knew already. So what were those coordinates that became useful to think about new ways of political organization? On one hand, it was the importance of the theory and analysis of the social movements of the time, not trying to find reality in those labels, but in our case, with the emergence of the unoccupied workers and the massive layoffs of companies, this is where we found it was important to contribute, to have an ideology, because the intensification of the class struggle was questioning the stability of society. And so its dominance was weakened. And that was beginning to happen at the beginning of the 90s. We saw processes of disobedience to the offensive of the capitalism that allowed to fight against neoliberalism. And so we started to find ways to start building a counter hegemony. We started questioning private property as the ultimate asset, land recuperation, buildings recuperation for community activities. And as an example of this counter hegemony, the collective and community facing or struggle to housework. But Mandel also helped us thinking how to have an organization without bureaucracy, where centralization wasn't going against democracy, even within different tendencies or trends. In his book, he said, and I quote, "There's a possibility to find bureaucracy in the organization against self-determination." And so we have this danger of the organizations becoming an autonomous body. And so a trend comes in of self-preservation of the apparatus as an end itself instead of a mean to an end. And so this is the last element that we got from this work of Mandel, and it's our link with our parties and the self-activity groups. And so it is not a contradiction what we were doing and the activities of those self-activity groups. On the contrary, we need to find and analyze the strategies of these groups. And there's also a link of respect so that we can prioritize the experience of the organization of those groups. He says that we need to stimulate the independent action of the masses. And our second encounter with Mandel was after all that experimentation, political and social experimentation of 2001, that rupture of the 2001 crisis and the following years, where we had unemployed groups or unemployed women and men groups. We had feminist groups, etc. And so the popular power conception structured our debates. We started talking about feminist socialism with several imprecisions. Not all of us understood the same about the popular power. And so the debates back then were on what's the strategic meaning of the auto-activity or self-activity of the masses and how this plays with the double power to going towards the revolution. And so finding this strategy, we worked with the work, the book, excuse me, of Mandel. And so this book helped us to develop some work lines. One of these elements is that the disputes of the working class are at the same time value or wealth disputes, but also power disputes against the power of capitalism, both in the workplace and how we organize the process of human life. The strikes and conflicts have a potential to go against that. And so Mandel says that in each struggle, there is the possibility to call for many people to participate actively in the decisions against the division of managers and managed. Second element here is that the bet to the construction of self-construction spaces has a need to make decisions. And so we need to reclaim the ability to decide, to get involved, that will generate those changes. And we could all recognize that in this experimentation, social and political experimentation in the Desocupas movement, unemployed people, the popular assemblies, and this reclaim of popular space or common spaces. And so we have elements of counter-hegemony here. But Mandel also told us that the goal of these organisms is not to create new organizations within the framework of capitalism. The goal is, he said, to elevate the level of awareness of masses, their ability to replicate hit by hit, question not by word, but with actions, the functioning of the capitalistic regime. this is how we will rise, and this is how we will defeat the capital order and welcome a social order, of course respectful of the democracy of workers. And so Mandel talks about the conciliation of classes, and he says that the worker control rejects all institutionalization. He talks about a previous stage, a previous governmental stage before the conquer of these institutions. And so, for example, with reformist parties, he claimed that participation on companies and a bigger democratization should come after taking down the government. And so all of these debates and discussions had a source in previous periods or previous times, and ends up in late 60s, etc. But we believe that this is very current. Auto-activity or self-activity is very important as a rupture to hegemony, the need to build self-control, and also to fight against those processes of the system. And then the last moment, this is to wrap up our encounter with Mandel, was the rise of the far right, with, of course, the arrival of the Cambiemos government in 2015 in our country. And so we started analyzing social processes that led to fascism to try and understand theoretically what these new rights were doing. And so in his book, he wants us to analyze the processes that came with the fascism. And he talks about the mistake of the Popular Front as a mistake. He wants us to have defensive positions against a fascism, and so this can go against the rights of people. He also calls to struggle against bourgeoisie, against the reduction of rights, of civil rights. But so for us, he has been a great reference to build our fights, to build our struggles, to have bridges to the past that, of course, due to the dictatorship, has been so hard to build, and also to build bridges with class struggles in the world. And so, of course, we didn't meet him personally, but we did meet him through the work of our comrades that have, created biographies and who have disseminated his work. Thank you very much to Jorgelina for her contribution, her reflections from Latin America. Now we have Kay from the US.
I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of my organization, Solidarity, the Fourth International, and by extension, the writings and work and activity of Livio and Ernest have always been very centered to programmatic and educational development. As has been mentioned, American Trotskyists have been involved with the Fourth International from its very beginning. We were present at the 1938 foundation of the International. There's a wonderful photo many of you have probably seen. This is a photo of Trotsky, probably in Puebla then, in the late 1930s in exile. And he's reading the militant that Ernest, the newspaper of the Socialist Workers' Party. And the picture is made in such a way that it's on the front of the picture, and it is Lenin. It's an article by Trotsky about Lenin. So we have all these connections very early on. I've been asked to talk about the influence of Livio and Ernest on solidarity or revolutionary organizations connected to the Fourth International today. To do so, though, given the particular history and evolution of U.S. Fourth Internationals, I have to slightly modify the question and attempt to answer that. So the question I will be responding to is, what has been the influence of Livio and Ernest in the past on our tradition, the present, and the future, which is something of a challenge, of which I'll end. We could say that there's three areas of contribution to Ernest and Livio. The first is, of course, their revolutionary commitment, their optimism. The second is their political, programmatic, and pedagogical contributions to the Marxist movement and to the education of Marxists all over the world, including the United States. And thirdly, their practical work as party builders. Of course, these last two points, the second and three, are perfect examples of Marxist praxism of the unity of revolutionary theory and practice. On the first one, several comrades have commented on the great commitment of the refusal of luck of luxurious life, the traditional austerity. And this put Ernest and Livio, I think, in a long, long tradition of revolutionary austerity, beginning with Robespierre from the Great French Revolution, passing by Lenin, who had found gold to be a very, very useful thing because we could put them as bathroom fixtures. And then, of course, Che, the austerity and commitment of a Che Guevara. There was a certain continuity and connection with all of them. Optimism. Livio and Ernest are born in 1923. This is the nadir of the world revolution, the last gasp of the Russian Revolution, the defeat of the Bulgarian Revolution, the German Revolution. Livio is born 6 months after the March on Rome and the taking of power by fascists and the crushing of the workers' movement in Italy and the suspension of political rights and liberties that were available at the time. And then they begin to be active politically at the end of the 1930s, when it was midnight in the century. So militants who can go through these experiences are born in a period of defeat and come to political age in a period of even worse defeat, but maintain the revolutionary optimism during the revolutionaries in our country and certainly in yours as well. Talk quickly about Livio's austerity. When I worked in Paris at International Viewpoint several years ago, when all of us would go to the cheap Turkish restaurant at lunch, Livio would stay in his office and take out his knife, his apple, his cheese, and his sausage. And he would work at the same time. This was a working lunch before it became a popular notion in the capitalist world. The second thing to talk about is that I'd like to talk about are the political, programmatic, and pedagogic contributions of Livio to our organization. Livio and Ernest saw themselves as preservers and continuators and transmitters of the best traditions of Marxism. And they did this also amongst the activists in the United States. One of the biggest periods of growth of our movement was, of course, in the radicalization of the 1960s and 1970s, when comrades joined the SWP, often out of their participation in the anti-war movement, in the women's movement, and of course in the Black Civil Rights Movement. All of these were tightly connected, of course. We understood their connection, the activist connection, and we recruited the very best of them. When we did the works, when they joined, the works of Ernest Mandel were key to their political formation, particularly in 3 different areas. One, basic political education. There's been references to Ernest's pamphlet on an introduction to Marxist economic theory. This was particularly popular. There were also Ernest's work on one of the most interesting things that people don't talk about is Ernest actually theorized students at one point, considering them to be declassed and therefore opening them to the possibility of finding their way to revolutionary Marxism. So the comrades of that generation really were the beneficiaries of Marxism transmitted to them through Ernest. After the unification in 1963 of the Fourth International that Ernest explained about, we saw a real political will on the part of the SWP to publish the works of Ernest, his works on the economic theory, and also on the question of the Leninist organization. The party had a very, very big effect on our comrades. And what was particularly also important to our militants at the time were his careful analysis of the Soviet Union as a degenerated worker states and all of the other countries around them as degenerated worker states. So in the 60s, then, his influence grows under the influence of these big upsurges in the U.S. and world class struggle. But part of his, I think the appeal of Ernest was also his flexibility and the way that he grounded all of his politics in the Marxist framework. This conception of the 3 sectors of the world revolution, the revolution in the advanced industrialized countries, the revolutions against the Stalinist bureaucratic regimes in those countries, and of course the anti-colonial revolution, was more than an elegant theoretical construction. It was a guide to action and how to orient militants in the United States and elsewhere about how to proceed, how to understand the interconnection between these struggles. There was another aspect of Ernest and Livio's thinking that was also very much appreciated. It was very much important for U.S. militants, and that was this understanding that Eric talked about the capacity of both of them and the Fourth International to recognize the revolutionary potential of currents coming outside of our own. But at the same time, while Ernest was very much inspired by the revolutions in Latin America, the anti-colonial struggles around the world, he wasn't seduced by that. While many intellectuals were drawn into a type of third worldism that thought that only in what we call the third world and what we now call the global south was the arena of revolution, Ernest understood this, once again, this dialectical relations between the 3. A great partisan, of course, of the great class struggles in the advanced industrial countries, the general strike in 1961 in Belgium, the massive general strike in France following the student upsurge in May 1968. And when Solidarność develops in Soviet, in Poland, and Ernest was a great partisan of this, and in his typical tradition of optimism, he saw this as the beginning of a political revolution, dear to Trotsky, that would replace and would build on the collectivized economy that was the fruit of the Russian Revolution, but that would reintroduce the essential part of socialism, which of course is workers' democracy. So it was this incredible capacity to understand the limits of other traditions, to square them, connect them with our own. Is one of the great attributes of thinking of Ernest. When the bureaucratic regimes in the 1990s began to fall in the 1990s, Ernest really, again, was a great partisan of this. And I remember participating in a meeting at the New School for Social Research in New York, where I was completing my doctorate. And he came to the floor, and in very glowing terms, he said that the workers in East Germany, the workers in the ex-Soviet Union, they want automobiles, they want televisions, they want consumer goods. And in his gravelly, heavy voice, with the accent that was his, he said, "And they are right." And in doing so, he connected with this very important notion in Marxism, that socialism is the fruit of abundance. Now, if we hear about the importance today, we think of this about the importance of consumer goods and cars, we think automatically of the environmental dimension of it. But Ernest was also aware of that too. And that is, I think, a legacy that will be brought out as we study more and more his work. The last one that I'd like to make, the last area where Ernest and Livio made great contributions to the past, present, and hopefully future of U.S. revolutionary movement is on the area of helping build parties. Ernest and Livio were builders of the Fourth International, but they were passionate proponents of unity in various sections, and they did what they could to build groups, Fourth International groups in other countries, including my own in the United States. When Joanna Misnick, who has long been a delegate to these meetings and who sends her warmest greetings to all of you, in preparation of my talk, because Joanna is of this generation and I'm being the generation afterwards. So Joanna transmits, Joanna's generation gets their Marxism from Ernest and Livio, and my generation, the after ones, get them from them. Well, Joanna told me a story I think that's worth repeating. At the time of the foundation of Solidarity in 1986, which was a fusion of three, say, Trotsky's cousins, Ernest was very reticent. He was not at all certain that this was a very good idea. Why? Because the other components were state capitalists and versions of state capitalists. There's no way, Joanna, that this project is going to work in this. Well, Joanna thought it would, and she was right. And it's to Ernest's great, another great trait of Ernest was his ability to recognize that situations have changed and his position would change. Joanna tells me the story that after the unification, there was a meeting. Ernest put his hand around her shoulders, thanked her, and acknowledged that her orientation was correct. The last thing I just want to say quickly is just a few words on the challenges. What is the future? Where do these influences remain? After the debates beginning in 1969 around armed struggle and party building in Latin America, the unification that was built in 1963 between the U.S. SWP and the Fourth International begins to dissolve. And as it does, as it dissolves, well, let me just say, to conclude, since I'm almost time, in 2016, as many of you are aware, a small left social democratic group called the Democratic Socialists of America saw a vertiginous rise, an explosion of nearly 100,000 members. And these are new militants with no familiarity of our traditions or even the great traditions of revolutionary Marxism. But there's a thirst in that organization among young militants to learn about that. Last April, about the time of Ernest's death, Alex de Jong published a wonderful article in Jacobin newspaper, the DSA. It was a wonderful article that really laid out great contributions of Ernest. But the fact that it was published in Jacobin tells us something. The fact that it was published by someone outside of the U.S. tells us something else. So the great challenge today to continue the work of Livio and Ernest as continuators and transmitters of Marxism is still a challenge for us. And as the young DSAers work their way to revolutionary Marxism, they will find much in inspiration and political direction from the works of these two devoted, talented revolutionaries, Livio and Maitan and Ernest.
Muchas gracias aquí. Y ahora, camaradas,
Thank you,
tenemos
Kay.
todavía 50 minutos
We
para
have
nuestra
50
discusión.
minutes for our discussion.
Entonces, alguien que quiera, las personas que
Who wants to talk? Who wants to intervene? We'll create a list. So I'll give you a few minutes so that people wanted to talk can tell me if they want to talk and in which language it will be, so that our comrade interpreters can organize themselves. We'd like to invite also people following the session via Zoom. If they'd like to ask any question or have any contribution, they can write it in the chat, and we will transmit their questions and contributions.
Okay, comrades, I'm Jans from the Netherlands, and one of the founders of this section and one of the founders of this institute. I met Ernest first in '68 on a meeting between, maybe Eric was there, in Dordrecht, between the Socialistische Jonge Wachten, you speak French, the Flemish Socialist Youth and the Dutch Socialist Youth, where Ernest was giving an introduction. And then first time I met Livio and Ernest together was on the IC here in Amsterdam in '74, which was the one of the big battlefronts between the Europeans and SWP in America. It was really a very heated meeting. I haven't seen any heated meeting that level after. The point is, if we want to analyze our own history, and particularly the way we can use our history to go forward, we have to be very critical. Of course, every nice words are said about Livio and about Ernest here. I miss a bit Pierre Franck in the trio. But the issue is that we have to be more critical about our own history, because I see too many familiar faces here. And that's very nice, but it's not the intention of building a new organization. We have the biography of Jan Willem on Ernest, which is a very thorough work, but missing is the discussion, particularly his obsession of Ernest with the Americans, with SWP, and the whole discussion on the split. We have the biography of Pierre Franck, from an earlier period from a French perspective. We have the Livio biography, and I'm really disappointed by the Livio biography, because it is a history of documents. And the documents, as we know very well, is our analysis of the situation. But it is not a political situation. The documents give our opinion and our discussions, but what is really happening in the section, what is really happening in the world around us. We're commenting on it. We have the 3 volumes of Paul Leblanc in a Paul Liebland, you have to say, although the family is from French Canada, about the American Trotskyism, but it's published in the same market. We have to be much more critical. And particularly in the Livio biography, I miss a lot of critical remarks, and clearly he despised the Dutch comrades. And there's a lot more to say. Happily, the biography of Pablo, what just came out, is repairing a bit of it. And last point, what is very important in all these histories is the role of the international leadership in relation to the sections. What was the role of the international leaders in intervening in discussions in sections? Nowadays, since the last decades, we say the sections and the leadership, in particular, and the discussion on France that we never had, actually in the meetings here, it is separate things. But that time, the leadership of the international was intervening in national discussions without deep knowledge of what is happening on the ground. And I think that is an advantage now, but we have to work on that, how to build organizations and international collaboration on that level. And that is still badly missing. One last remark, this institute is officially a research institute, so we can make a document and we can vote that the history of the Fourth International in all its ramifications is become a project of this institute. And of course we will vote in favor, and then we will see what happens.
Bonjour chers camarades. Alors, merci d'abord pour cette organisation, je pense, qui est très très importante pour notre histoire. Alors c'est Uraz Aydin de la section turque de la 4e internationale. Je voudrais d'abord commencer par une petite anecdote personnelle, qui m'est très sympathique. J'ai connu Ernest quand j'avais 6 ans et demi à peu près. Mes parents étaient membres de la section sympathisante à l'époque de la 4e internationale dans les années 70 et étaient réfugiés politiques après le coup d'État de 1980.
At that time, they were political refugees after the military coup in the 80s, and other founding comrades in Turkey, masses that you will know. We were all in France. Ernest published, to that time, in small magazines that we sent inside tins and cans to Turkey to avoid censorship. And they copied that from the example of the comrades in Poland. They made an interview with Mandel for that magazine, and my father did that, and my mother was translating the interview. I was there. It was an old building belonging to the Breche in Paris. Mandel was developing his analysis on the international situation, on the left revolutionary movements, the workers' movement in Poland, and he was sharing also some words with me, a 6-year-old that wasn't aware of the situation, that I wasn't even aware why I changed my country. That's the history I'd like to tell, that I remember from this meeting. Regarding Mandel and Livio, briefly, Livio assured the relationship of the sympathisant organizations in the 70s in Turkey with the Fourth International, but not only Livio. Our comrade François Bouet, who died too soon some years ago, and GPSC from Australia, were comrades that were tightening the link of the international with Turkey. They were bringing brochures, sharing information at a time where there were not many means of communication. old comrades also talk about the surprise of Livio when he appeared at the meeting. I think it was at my parents' house, and all the militants came and they left their weapon at the entrance of the meeting. Remember, we are in a context of extreme struggles and anti-fascist struggles in the left-wing movement, and everyone needed to defend himself. At the same time, we needed to read Mandel to defend ourselves on a political and scientific basis. At the middle of the 70s, mid-70s, we had a publisher where we had some classical Marxist publications, the economical thinking of Marx, a book on the policy fiction written by Mandel. In exile, we still published many books, also published later in French, as the book on the Second World War, the controversy of Mandel with some cults in the United States, The Long Waves, published later, I think.
Merci. Voilà. Bon, je vais finir rapidement, mais en 91, Ernest était venu.
And to wrap up, in 91, Ernest visited Turkey because it was this period, 89-90. I think you can see the video on YouTube. This meeting was interpreted by Lead Benner. I want to talk about him too. He made some contributions to Impreco for a long time and was a member of the Belgian community. This meeting was very important because Ernest Mandel was a very known character, even though the majority of the left wing in Turkey didn't share its Trotskyist vision, but he was acknowledged as a theoretical author, and that helped us. After he died, we still published books from Ernest every 5-10 years. We still have some meetings to pay tribute to Mandel. And now in my current party, we still recommend to read Mandel. But I think beyond his theoretical contributions, thanks to his work, we can find a moral strength coming from these two comrades. A moral strength to be the heirs of these two very important figures of the international Marxism.
Hello again. Good morning. I'm Vinicius from Brazil. And I really want to thank you for the discussion. I was very moved about this discussion for many reasons. I'll start by the picture of Francisco Louçã with Mandel, which was reminds me of one day that I did the same with Gilbert Achcar in a debate in Campinas, where I think the new militants of the international has to pass through this task always, and it's an honor always. And I think already I was very happy to for the discussions on the essay that I really wanted to read Alex Lyon's article. He's too modest to tell us about his articles, but other ones can do it, and I was very excited and anxious to discuss this. But of course, the most important discussion in this conference was, of course, the Leninist theory of organization. There is one of the most important books of my life. I hoped that this discussion would be on the sixth conference, and I cannot be on the sixth conference. My flight is going to be earlier than that, and I was already crying because I'm not discussing that. And then you guys brought to me the discussion, and I'm happy about it because it's really important in Latin America, especially in South America, is Mandel's tradition, Mandel's contribution was often confused with a non-Leninist tradition, and this is, of course, far from the truth. But and we have our own interpretation of Leninists, and this is so much important because all of the things that all of you told us, especially Jorgelina, because in Argentina we have several different traditions in Trotskyism, and Mandel's was, I never know that someone read Mandel's there, and this is great news for me. We have to rescue this tradition as a Leninist tradition, but also a really fundamentally democratic tradition. This is not has to be seen apart, and when we see together, I think we see the real contribution of Lenin to Marxism, and Mandel brought us to us this important contribution, because when he told us the way he looks of Lenin, I think Lenin is more alive than ever. Thank you.
Y ahora vamos a tener el camarada
Comrade Jacob in English.
que va a hablar en inglés.
Well, I can't go into any details of Ernest's influence for the German section, but I want to stress something different. That's the abilities of Ernest's speech. Not only he could talk to 3,000 members of the International, that's the Brussels meeting in November 17. Not only could he speak to a mass rally of the LCR in France in May 71, but also he could really have a good ability to find the right level to talk to comrades at very elementary level when we had educationals. He could always adapt his speech to what the people could understand, the comrades could understand and take from him. And at the same time, he could have a discussion with bourgeois politicians. In, I don't know, when it was 72, he had a discussion at the university in Cologne with a Christian Democrat politician. And the whole 700 people were acclaiming his speech because he was really well understood. He could destroy the bourgeois logic of the Christian Democrat politician. And that is, I don't know any left theorist or politician that has this ability to engage in any discussion, whether it's left within the left milieu or with bourgeois politicians. And I think we should engage in this ability to, we should take it as an example and try to be like him. Thank you.
Ahora va a hablar Manuel de
Manuel, Germany in English,
en
in
francés.
French.
Bonjour camarade Manuel d'Allemagne.
Hello, comrades. My name is Manuel from Germany. I'm really happy that Jacob has just spoken, because I would have said exactly the same thing, at least to start off with. But
on traduit pas? Maintenant, on traduit. Qui se raccroche un peu à ce que Joost a dit.
What I would say is somewhat in line with what Joost was saying.
Je suis bien d'accord
Okay,
avec
sir, so I
ce que
very much
Jacob a
agree
dit. Je
with what
pourrais
Jacob
souligner
said.
tout ça encore, mais je voulais parler d'un aspect qui a soulevé Joost.
Say more about what Jacob said, but I'd like to turn to what Joost was saying. And in the 1970s, there was a political culture in the FI of intervening in the debates of the sections. We also saw that in the German section. You might recall, Chekhov, that there was no problem with this. There was Charles André and also John Ross, and they always said opposite things. So if you like it, it all balanced out in the end. But with respect to Ernest's interventions into these debates,
très fructueux pour les camarades allemands.
It wasn't always very useful for German comrades. The old timers, I'm talking about people who were my parents' age, that Ernest's interventions before entryism was to convince comrades to remain in the SPT, even after 61, even after the first politically significant break with the SDS, the emergence of SDS at the time, and during my own activist years, he spent a lot of energy to convince us that in the name of the Workers' United Front, we should vote in favor of the SPD. One day I asked him, what's the point? And he said, the point is to initiate dialogue with social democrat workers. But no one really understood the point of all this. And so his concrete interventions into the life of sections, even when the comrade was as brilliant as he was, as others have rightly said, and sometimes that can be difficult to digest for those on the receiving end. But let me just say that in 1972, or 1972, Ernest and Gisela Mandel won me over to the Fourth International. It was a good thing for me. I'm not sure if it was such a good thing for the Fourth International, though.
Wilfried, de Alemania.
Wilfried from Germany, sorry, who will speak in French. And please don't forget those of you who are in Zoom online, please send us your questions or your interventions on the chat, please.
Yet another German says, Wilfried. I'd like to base myself on what Vinicius from Brazil was saying. I'd like to add, if you'd like, the flip side of what he was saying. He was talking a lot about, was talking a lot about Lenin. I very much recall a very long interview that Ernest said with a bit of a nod to their comrades in my international who accused me of Luxembourgist deviation. And there's something true about this. It's somewhat amusing, but he very much appreciated, very much liked the work of Rosa Luxemburg. He didn't always read and analyze the works of Lenin and Trotsky, but he also did so for Luxembourg, and he understood the context, that is the social democratic left before the First World War, and the important role of the weekly journal Neue Seite. He wrote a really wonderful essay about the theoretical journal, which was distributed worldwide at the time.
And all this is very much in line with what Erika was saying.
Eric a mentionné
His
son
very
administration et sa conviction très
strongly held
profonde
belief
que
that the
le
German
mouvement
working
ouvrier
class movement
allemand
after the Second World War
après la Deuxième
would
Guerre mondiale
return
va
or
reprendre là où il a dû
return to the role it had been playing up until it was crushed in 1933. Of course, the German working class movement was deeply influenced. The country was divided in two, literally, but also the social democratic tradition had been preserved in the west of the country, whereas the so-called communist tradition, as this was seen, was incorporated into the state of the GDR. And of course, this, in terms of criticisms of our movement, one of the criticisms of the work of Ernest Mandela had to do with the different levels of the consciousness, or in both sides, the West and East, and which were very much different from what he would have wanted, and this could be seen at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1990. Just to wrap up, in response to what Yus was saying when he was talking about Livio's memoir, saying that Livio didn't actually write memoirs, that these weren't memoirs. He actually wrote 2 books about his political life and work. He wrote a contribution to the history of the Fourth International. There are some shortcomings in the sense that there's a lot of analysis. But Pierre Frank's short book and Livio's book are very useful. They themselves say that they don't claim to have the last word. And Penny said this, that when it comes to history, we need much more detailed assessments with many points of view. But I strongly recommend the comrades read and even turn back to these books. They're actually, these books are very useful. If I have any time left, 1 second, 30 seconds. I'd like to add a bit to what Manuel was saying about Gisela Mandela, yet another German. I think she played an important role as in our movement, as also in supporting Ernest, but also in the FI. I was very impressed by her when I met her the first time. She was rather different from Ernest, shall we say. Ernest was the great intellectual, the great theoretician. She was a much more down-to-earth person. Someone who came out of the radical youth movement, the German SDS, and who contributed a great deal to the on-the-ground building of the movement and its leadership.
Now, Penny.
In English.
In English.
I wanted indeed to reaffirm the importance of events like this. Because as Kay said, in fact, it's not just a question of talking about contribution in the past or the present, but it is also the future. And because some comrades queried, why would we have a centenary conference? What was the point of it? But I think that precisely the point of it is to have the sort of contributions that we've heard and that we will continue to hear for the rest of the day and tomorrow about what was because obviously Ernest and Livio were themselves, they were people, they were real living people but they were also representing the Fourth International in their activity, in their contributions, in their discussions with comrades as they travelled, and so on. And so what we're doing with a conference like this, and we should also, I didn't mention it, but there was an extremely impressive conference of 200 people organised by the Italian comrades in Rome in April of this year, in fact, on Livio's actual 100-year anniversary, with leaders from all the Italian left and trade unions, who all contributed about the involvement and the contribution of Livio at that level. I want to underline that. So what we're doing is keeping that memory alive, because it tells us something about how to act for the future. It tells us something about the importance indeed of open Marxism. It tells us something about the importance of being really involved and building national organizations, which both Livio and Ernest and of course all other valuable leaders of the Fourth International have done and do. But it is to emphasize those points and perhaps break with a certain conception of the rootless revolutionary, which obviously there have been people who've been forced into exile and have had to do that, but the importance of being rooted in a real national reality. And so and therefore, indeed, as I mentioned, the work of bringing together all the elements that we can to write the history of our international, because of what it can help us do for the future, is extremely important. And as I said, that's why I took on the task of indeed doing the index and all the notes and the apparatus that are in the English and French editions of Livio's memoirs. In a couple of weeks' time, I'll be meeting with those responsible for the library, the university library in Paris, where we deposited many boxes of archives of the Fourth International, because the work of classifying all that has not yet really started. In order for that to be available to people who want to work on the history of the Fourth International, and indeed bring out many things that are forgotten. Because when we think of the history of the Fourth International and its debates, there are certain things that are always mentioned, and we forget a lot of the history, the places we've been, the places we've had organizations. We have, online archives and all the rest of it. And so every contribution, and Livio doesn't pretend to do anything more in his memoirs than to write a contribution. He says so very, very explicitly. So we have to take them all and work on them all to produce an overall understanding of our international and what it has contributed and can contribute in the future.
Thank you to Penny. I'm on the list now to speak in Spanish, and then Eric in French, I believe. Okay. Well, I wasn't going to intervene, but after Penny's contribution, I would like to say something. Our comrades have already mentioned Mandel's and Livio's contribution to their organizations on a political level. And now we heard Penny talking about the importance of the memoirs of Livio Maitan. Well, I come from a trajectory of a background of the Fourth International, and this year it's been 30 years of my militance in the Fourth International. international. So I started in student movements, feminist movements, and I didn't meet Ernest Mandel in person, although of course his contributions are of great importance in our formation as militants and us. That's the case as well for our section, Brazilian section. But I did meet Livio Maitan in person, and that was a strong experience for me and for our generations as young people, as youth in the World Social Forum when Livio was there with us in Brazil. He shared experiences, the importance of the altar movement, and we know that the youth had an important role on this. And so when we are talking about remembering and keeping up the memory and the importance of legacies of these comrades, we really need to keep in mind not just the written contributions, but also the opportunities that we had to share in person with them, mainly for what we call the generational transition of the Fourth International militants. Today I'm 49, back then I was 20-something, and for us, it was very important to uphold the importance of internationalism. The experiences that we had back then in Brazil, due to all the changes that were happening at the beginning of the century, but also realizing that there were comrades with important experiences in other parts of the world, that the youth of the Fourth had experiences of a construction of a type of internationalism that was important to share. And so Livio, of course, wasn't young by age, but he contributed a lot, sharing his experience or the experiences in Italy and in other parts of Europe, for example, and also from a perspective of the importance of building actions in Latin America. So for us, we have this strong memory of him being there in person. We took some pictures. Back then, of course, we didn't have internet. We had to print the pictures, and these pictures today are in the hands of Mikael. We came, Mikael and I were here for a seminar in Europe, and we saw a picture of many of them in one of the forum, and so he told me, let's gather those pictures so we can publish them in an article of the Fourth. And so this is really valuable to remember all of these moments, especially from this generation, for this generation of the young international. Okay, now Eric. And after Rick, I don't know if the comrades of the roundtable maybe want to go back to some points. We still have 15 minutes.
It's just to respond or to continue along the lines of what Wilfried was saying. I'm really convinced that Ernest was a Luxembourgist. It wasn't easy for him to kind of own up to this. It was more important for him to assert the Leninist character of his thought, but very sincerely, his defense of Trotsky and Trotsky as an alternative, his book Trotsky as Alternative, is in a way based on his conviction that the Trotsky of the revolution betrayed was a merger of what was best in Leninism and what was best in Luxemburgism in terms of Rosa's call in 1918 in relation to the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly and the restriction of restrictions on debate in the Bolshevik Party and her fears about this. Trotsky himself in Revolution Betrayed is very clear about this. And so Ernest merely summarizes the very specific demands of Trotsky in Revolution Betrayed and also in the transitional program on the matter of socialist democracy. And in this regard, Ernest was absolutely convinced of the accuracy or the relevance of Luxemburg's calls back in 1918.
Okay, then to wrap up our session of the morning, we will give the floor to Terry, and then if any other comrade wants to speak, we still have 10 minutes.
Thanks, Tasia, and thank you to comrades who've contributed from the floor. I found the contributions generally very valuable, and I think they've added to the texture we've been able to bring from the tables thus far. And of course, the conversation will continue. But I did want to make a bit of a response to Joost, which some other comrades have already done. But I think, first of all, when Joost says we should be critical, well, of what? It's not helpful to just make that sort of general thing without saying what you think.
50 minutes more and I pay for you.
Yeah. Joost.
Please, yeah, come on. Please. How can you say that? Please.
So I think there are things I would personally be critical of, and I didn't. But there are other things where I agree with the way Alex de Jong puts it, which is that sometimes on a superficial reading of things, you can think, I mean, people have talked a lot about Ernest's optimism, but I think it was optimism of the will rather than optimism of the intellect, and that he was always, as a number of comrades said, prepared to say that he was wrong afterwards. But I just wanted to conclude, as I was not able to conclude my introduction with what I was going to say at the end, to quote something from Ernest and then to analyze it in today's context. So Ernest, in the debate with the Eurocon, said, we try to develop the independent class action, independent mass activity of all sectors of the exploited and oppressed, which are in their great majority in the advanced capitalist countries, workers, industrial workers and unproductive workers, but workers nevertheless. We include in that women, we include in that students, we include in that all the oppressed nationalities and all oppressed sectors of society. We have no narrow industrial workers' worldview of what human liberation and human emancipation can be. So my reflection on that is that if I was writing that, I think if we were writing that today, we would be more explicit about the involvement of racialized people, of LGBTIQ people, and I hope of disabled people. I don't think we talk about women in a way that implied that women were somehow not part of the productive working class. I don't think we'd use the term productive and unproductive in the same way that seems quite judgmental. But on the other hand, this was in 1977. It was way in advance of what most other currents, certainly on the British left, were saying, which didn't look at questions of oppression at all. And I think for me, what I hope I learned from Ernest and Livio over the last 50 years, and I hope I can contribute in some ways in passing on to younger comrades, exactly in the spirit that Kasia spoke on, is that our project is for human emancipation and liberation, and that starting from that grounding point, we can go forward together. Thank you, comrades.
I just wanted to thank and appreciate the interventions. I'm still trying to unify like some ideas that came up over several interventions and also here in the panel. I think that one of the questions is that this critic view or this need to have an open view has to do with the fact that at least this happens to us all the time, that in the debate of the left, there's always this authority quote. What did Trotsky say about this? Or somebody else say about this? And so this takes us in dogmatic positions that don't allow us to have a dialogue with new phenomena, and even against our authorities, our political authorities. Rosa, Lenin. Obviously, we have guidelines and we need them for our political intervention, but sometimes we also have to test that in light of new realities. And I believe this is something that we need to keep up. And then other things that came up in the interventions, besides this usage of the analysis tools for the particular realities, I think this is very interesting how in different periods of class struggle this came up. It's not the same, the democratic struggle or the struggle during dictatorships or repression regimes. And so the possibility to have these tools to be able to fight in different contexts. And so I thought it was very interesting that we have our references, what Benny and Jacob said, to have these spaces to get to know each other, to get to know our references, and even to encourage each other to imitate some of the stuff that we need, the things that we need to. For example, Jacob said that we need to imitate the way of intervention, the way of dialogue, the way to translate into into an easier language, complex concepts, the importance of writing, but also the ability to motivate ourselves, because willing is necessary to encourage other people. And I believe that homage, or these type of demonstrations are not necessary. We don't do this to build statues, untouchable leaders. Many of the stories that came up talk about that. People who, from their humanity, regular people, as any of us, have had an absolutely important role to all of our organizations. That was it.
Well, I don't have much to add here. I did very much appreciate the interventions and everything that's been said. And as I listened to them, I had the impression that we're not at the end of this discussion, but we're at the very beginning. In the US, Solidarity finds the Fourth International and the IIRE, but also the programmatic acquisitions of the Fourth International to be an incredibly important resource for us. And the challenge of Marxism has always been to apply its method to current situations. And Livio and Ernest were absolute experts at this. They were absolutely people that had a capacity to do this at the highest level. Penny and Alex talked about all the work that has been done in cataloging their work, in organizing them and publishing them. But at the same time, the story is lots of unfinished work. And perhaps this could be another source of collaboration between our various groups. I know we would benefit very much from participating in this and would be interested in it. And perhaps some of these writings can be brought out. For example, the introduction to Marxist economic theory, perhaps that could be brought out with an update, with a preface by some of our comrades who work in those areas. So I think there's a lot to be done here. And but one of the advantages we have, and this will be the last point here, is that Ernest, and this came out in some of the interventions, I think, from Alda, he had also wasn't only a militant of the Fourth International, but he had a status that was beyond, and it allowed beyond. He was a representative of Marxist of thinking, recognized by traditions beyond our own, and also even of the bourgeoisie. If you look at the the obituaries that were written, there was a recognition that this was someone who really kept Marxism alive. Marxism, which of course is pronounced dead every single generation. It keeps being bourgeois. Commentators tell us how it's dead. We know that it's living, and as we continue that, the works of Livio and Ernest will be foremost.
Well, I don't have much to say. Just to reiterate what was said both by Penny and Jorgelina, and also by Kay, that we are not looking at Livio and Ernest legacy as a dead legacy. We are not looking at them as statues either, or icons. We are acknowledging their absolutely huge, immense contribution. And as Penny pointed out, it's very important to have this kind of conferences also in the perspective of looking for the future, because precisely this is not a dead legacy, it's a legacy for the future, not in general political terms, whether they are obviously criticisms and things, but it's a very, very important legacy. That it's important to build it from this legacy to build for the future. That's all.